The creation of previews inside RealFlow is very user-friendly and a matter of just a few clicks. Once a simulation is ready, go to the Playback menu and choose OpenGL Preview. RealFlow goes through the simulation, takes screenshots from the viewport, and writes the images to disk. After the last frame, the images are buffered and then shown in the movie player. This window is a central part of RealFlow's preview system. The player's control bar has the same functionality as music or media players, but there are a few more elements. With the help of the number feeds, you can specify the start and end frames of the preview. FPS stands for frames per second, and it is a current playback rate. Please note that this value is read directly from RealFlow simulation options. They can be found here. Then there is a loop function and a button to remove the currently loaded sequence from the player. When the fit option is checked, the movie is always adjusted to the player's window size. When it is unchecked, the original size is displayed. With skip, you can make sure that the adjusted playback rate is maintained. RealFlow allocates a certain amount of RAM for playback tasks, the image buffer. If the buffer is filled completely, the player still tries to show all frames, but the FPS rate will drop. In this case, you can tell the player to skip frames and keep the adjusted FPS rate instead. The movie player also provides a convenient method to write out files with a built-in compression option. If you want to load an already existing preview sequence, the player can also be launched from RealFlow's layout menu. In this case, there is just an empty canvas, but with a disk symbol, it is possible to open a preview. By default, the preview images are stored in the project director's preview folder, under Frames. Please bear in mind that the files in this folder will be overwritten each time you create a preview. If you want to backup an already existing preview, just rename the preview folder. RealFlow will create a new one automatically. Another possibility is to alter the image's prefix under Export Central. Double-click on the prefix and enter a new name. When you take a closer look at the preview branch, you can also see an entry called Image Sequence. But here, the sequence is not stored under frames, but images. When you activate this resource, RealFlow takes a one-to-one screenshot from the viewport as well, but this is not an automatic process. The recording is triggered when you drag the timeline slider or press the playback button. The results, on the other hand, are not opened in the movie player by default. Another part of the preview system is the appropriate preferences section. Please go to Edit, open the Preferences panel and choose Preview. There, you can find everything you need to customize your previews. Size is most probably the most important parameter, and you can choose from various predefined settings or enter your own values. A very interesting feature is located under top right caption. This function is used to add more information to the viewport, and you can enter a fixed expression or use the provided variables. The variables read information like frame rate, resolution, or the scene's name and print them. The variables can be combined with your text as well, as shown in this example. When you click on OK, the information is shown in the upper right corner of the viewport. If you cannot see it, please activate the caption here. But let's go back to the preview preferences, because there is one button that has not been explained so far: Maxwell Options. This panel provides the basic settings for RealFlow's implementation of our Maxwell Render engine. As always, preferences are applied globally to every RealFlow scene, but there is also a way to define settings which are only valid for the currently loaded scene. These local Maxwell preferences can be found in the icon bar and contain the same parameters. Although Maxwell Render is part of the previous system too, we will talk about the parameters a little later. Cameras can be imported with other scene elements, for example from an SD file, or created inside RealFlow directly. The number of coexisting cameras is not limited, and each camera can have its specific settings. Imported cameras always have some fixed parameters which cannot be changed. The orange colored fields indicate these settings. Additionally, you also see width and height settings. When a camera is created inside RealFlow, then the associated values from the Preferences section are taken and used here. If you change them, you also override the preferences, and the preview will be created using the entered values. Imported cameras come with predefined values according to your 3D program's render settings. To look through a camera, press the 5 key. In scenes with more than one camera, you are able to toggle through the camera views with the same shortcut. Another option is to drag and drop a camera into the viewport. Once the camera view is active, two blue frames appear, representing the camera's field of view. The frame's aspect ratio is exactly the same as specified under width and height. If you do not want to show these frames, deactivate them under View. There, the grid can be disabled as well. Previews do not require simulation, and it is also possible to make previews from animations as well. In combination with the camera, you can achieve a very nice effect on the fly. Create a simple animation and switch to camera mode. Keep the animated object selected and right-click on the viewport. Now, activate the Follow Selected option and create the preview. What you get is a very nice camera animation with a focus on the active object. Just on a side note, if you want to change the preview range, please adjust the values to the left and right of the timeline. The previews we have created so far are so-called OpenGL Previews. The good thing with this type is that you get a complete representation of the viewport with all its settings, shading modes, and icons. It is, for example, possible to define a different shading mode for every object individually with the appropriate buttons in the icon bar. Nodes can also be hidden from the preview, and each node has its own display panel. There, you will find additional properties which are added to the preview as well. It is even possible to create previews with fully textured objects. To assign a texture, open the Texture panel and load a bitmap from your hard disk. If you cannot see the texture, please go back to the Display panel and activate the object's texture mode. By now, the creation of previews was only a matter of a few seconds, because there are just some animated elements in the scene. What if the scene contains a massive Hybrido simulation with 100 million particles, or huge meshes? In this case, the speed of your storage medium and the graphics card are the decisive factors. It can take a while until a file with 1.5 GB has been loaded and displayed. If you do not want to wait for hours until the entire simulation is loaded, we recommend using the already mentioned image sequence preview from the Export Central dialog. When this option is active, screenshots will be taken at simulation time, but you should make sure that the initially defined point of view does not change. Maxwell Render offers a sophisticated method of creating rendered previews at studio quality. Before we start to explain this process, we take a look at the engine's preferences. As mentioned in the first chapter, the settings can be found in the icon bar. Let's take a quick tour through the most important parameters. With Intensity, you are able to control the strength of the scene's global light source. The Physical Sky option enables a realistic model of the sky, where the color depends on the current time of the day. This time can be changed easily with the slider below, and it controls the sun position. Without a physical sky, a conventional sky dome is used. Quality is important because it also defines the size of the rendered image in the Maxwell Interactive window. If the value is not high enough, the rendered image is blurred. The number of threads determines how many cores are used for the render. If you create a final high-quality render via the command line, for example, then you should use a maximum number of cores on your machine. Physical render engines, like Maxwell, improve the image's quality over time. During the first seconds, the image is grainy, but this noise disappears, and the sampling level is used to control this process. The higher the sampling level, the less noise the final render will have, but render time will also increase. If you want to limit the time that will be used to complete a frame, you can enter an appropriate value here. For quick previews, the draft engine is absolutely enough. If you want to create a high-quality render for your clients, then you should switch to studio quality. Close the dialog and return to RealFlow. Now, add a few objects, position them, and click on the Fire button in the icon bar. After a few seconds, the image should look as shown here. The content of the rendered image is exactly the same as in the viewport. That's nice, but there is a much more impressive feature. Navigate through the viewport and watch how the render view is constantly updated in real time. At this stage, it is even possible to change the render engine's preferences, like the time of the day, and apply these new settings to the current image. If you want to add and show new objects, the render process has to be stopped and restarted again. So far, we've only rendered some objects, but RealFlow is a fluid simulation software first and foremost. The question is, how are particles rendered? Let's try it. Stop Maxwell Fire, add an emitter, simulate a few frames, and hit the button again. As you can see, the particles are displayed as small spheres. The radius of these spheres can be changed with the emitter's Maxwell Render panel. This panel is not only available for emitters, but for every other node as well, except daemons, iDocs, and cameras. A very strong feature of the emitter's Maxwell settings is the multi-point option, because it creates new particles without resimulating. The value defines a number of particles created per existing particle. Dispersion defines the area where the new particles are located. Multipoint is a fantastic and easy to use method for creating high amounts of foam or spray at render time. The extra particles are not stored, by the way. Under Maxwell Render, you can also see the material option. Here, it is possible to assign a dedicated Maxwell material file, but please bear in mind that they work completely differently from standard textures in RealFlow. It is not enough to open a texture map, but it has to be a MXM file. Some predefined materials are already available, and you can apply one by selecting an entry. Finally, you have the possibility of hiding nodes from the render selectively. This can be done here directly, or with the appropriate buttons in the icon bar. If you want to change the render state of a large number of objects at once, you should group them, or use RealFlow's layer system. Then, multiple nodes can be hidden or shown with a single click. Maxwell's Fire engine is a great tool for fast previews when you have to evaluate a simulation, but it only works for single frames. What if you want to create a high-quality render inside RealFlow without exporting the entire scene data to a 3D application? Is this possible at all? The answer is yes. Furthermore, the render process can also be triggered via the command line, and this is good news not only for Macintosh users. Owners of Maxwell Studio should open the Export Sender dialog and enable the MXS option. When the resource is active, RealFlow writes a Maxwell scene file for each frame that can be opened and modified in Maxwell Studio. From there, the scene can be sent to Maxwell Render as well, where you have additional possibilities like the multi-light option or image processing tools. Before you start rendering the scene, please apply the desired materials, manage the node's visibility, and, this is important, choose a camera view. Without a camera, the render remains empty. The material definition has to be made for each node individually, just the same way as in your 3D program. Once the scene is ready, choose Maxwell Preview from the playback menu to start the render. In this case, the render is performed within RealFlow's Maxwell Interactive window, very similar to the OpenGL Preview. If you want to do the render with the command line tool, click on the black button in the Maxwell bar to activate this mode. Then, click on Maxwell Preview again and wait until the render is finished. The files can be found in the Frames folder or the project's preview directory. If the movie player is not launched automatically, open it from the Layout menu and load the sequence.